All right, welcome everyone. This is going to be the beginning of the final unit. So, the first paper we're going to discuss is U.S. policy in the Middle East in the first year of Trump, a report card. And this is from the Middle East Institute, which is a think tank. Okay, this is by Brian Katulis, and this was from May of 2026, from what I remember. And it's basically a 1 year review of the Trump administration's approach to the Middle East and sort of a report card, right? All right. So we'll dive straight into section one, the executive summary. Excuse me. And they make a couple of points. First, they sort of gave props for the ceasefires in Gaza and Lebanon. I would obviously point out that Lebanon has since devolved into conflict with Israel, and Israel basically occupying the south of the country. And Lebanon has been just further degraded. I mean, it is a mess. Inflation is rising, food is difficult to find, housing is destroyed. There's mass immigration. I mean, it's just a mess, right? And in some sense, this conflict between Lebanon and Israel is also sort of bleeding into the discussions between the United States and Iran, right? Okay. Next, they mention sort of what they say substantial damage to Iran's nuclear and military infrastructure. This is true. Unfortunately, this is tactical, not strategic, right? Just blowing up a bunch of stuff is not the winning of a war, and you can't really win a war that way. Air forces don't win wars, bombing campaigns don't win wars. And in some sense, Iran might actually be stronger than they were last year, right? Because they've sort of coalesced around the revolutionary leadership and fragmented leadership. They have discovered their strength in the lever that is the Strait of Hormuz. They realize just how much power they have on international markets with fertilizers and oil and petroleum products, etc. They also mentioned the uncertain transition in Syria. I would say so far this has actually been uh, a positive shift in the region, right? Bashar al-Assad, who was the former Syrian leader, who was propped up largely by Putin in Russia, was toppled and forced to flee the country. And a former ISIS leader has now become the leader of Syria. Um, which was and is a little concerning, right? But things do seem to be taking um, a positive change. They seem to be moving in a positive direction in Syria. The economy is becoming a little bit more stabilized. The currency is becoming a little bit more stabilized. Former refugees are actually finally starting to trickle back into Syria for the first time. Uh, Trump Trump got rid of some of the sanctions on Syria to try to help them because they were showing positive signs. So this has been one of the good things that come out of the region. Next, they discuss bilateral deals on technology, investment, and military sales. We've sort of hammered on that in this class. Saudi Arabia buys a bunch of military equipment from the United States, as does Egypt and some others in the region. Let's see. They also mentioned that this region is diversifying, not only economically, but politically and strategically, to, away from the United States, arguably, and towards China, Russia, India. They haven't necessarily picked a side, but they want there to be many sides, right? So that, like, if something goes wrong, they can shift, and so that there's some diversity in their foreign backing and investment and these sorts of things, right? Okay, finally, they offer some grades on quite a few different aspects of Middle Eastern policy. They say we get a D for Israel and Palestine. We did manage to broker a ceasefire, but then largely lost attention. We still haven't really put the peacekeeping mission together. We still haven't really, de-weaponized Hamas. There's still, Israel holds massive amount of their territory, all of these problems. And so while we did get a ceasefire, we just basically walked away at that point, right? Iran, they suggest we get a D. I would shift this probably to an F since the war began. Things are not really going very well with the war. We don't really seem to have any sort of a plan for victory. We have shown them the power of controlling the Strait of Hormuz. Inflation is going to rise across the planet moving forward because of crops and fertilizer costs. This isn't going very well. Let's be real. Okay, the next one, enhancing the stability of the state system. They give them a C. They really focus on sort of the stability of some of the major rentier states and the Gulf states, UAE, Qatar, Oman, Yemen. I mean, not Yemen, Saudi Arabia. Yemen is still a problem, right? Lebanon's still a problem. Um, Israel, Iran, Palestine, still a problem. Syria improving, right? And so there's some sense of improvement in the region, but this is still a really mixed bag, right? Counterterrorism is another subcategory that they give a C to the United States foreign policy. We have helped to shore up some, we've decapitated some leadership in the area as we did under Trump 1. But we haven't really put anything in place to fill the vacuum or to like stanch, I don't know, the revolutionary movements, these sorts of things. Okay, and then finally, managing relationships with key partners. They also give us a C. There has been a lot of attention on the Abraham Accords, which arguably has brought a little bit of stability to the area, and at least some of the states are willing to listen, especially Saudi Arabia. But I would suggest that we're really weak against Netanyahu. There's something odd going on with how much strength Netanyahu has in sort of forcing the United States into these odd positions, right? And all of the sort of military weaponry, technology, intelligence, etc., that we're feeding into Israel, which is just making the region worse in some sense. Okay. We'll move on. Section 2, key analytic judgments. They have 10 major judgments here that we'll review. First, the Middle East is no longer the center stage in U.S. foreign policy and domestic politics as it was post 9/11, right? The center of gravity has shifted under the Trump 2 administration to what they are starting to call the quote unquote Don Roe doctrine. This comes from the Monroe Doctrine of the late 19th century, which basically said that we will not accept any interference in our hemisphere, right? Europe needs to back the hell away from the Caribbean, South America, Central America, etc. This is the United States domain, right? And in some sense, the Trump administration is shifting back in that direction. We saw the capture of Maduro. We're seeing pressure on South American governments. We're seeing pressure on Cuba and oil embargoes, etc. So the Middle East, in some sense, has taken a step backward in our prioritization, right? All right. Key point number 2. The Middle East remains a key arena for geopolitical competition in security, economic, and technological fronts, right? And we're not really focused enough on the interconnection between the Middle East and China and Russia, right? And maybe India you could throw into this bag. As the next paper we'll talk about soft power in China, suggests or discusses, China's power in the region is growing and growing fast, right? And Russia has a lot of power in the region in sort of undermining the Western influence, right? They were propping up Bashar al Assad. They send money to Yemen. There have been reports that they're sending sort of technology and intelligence and surveillance and maybe even weaponry into Iran to help with the fight against the United States. And so the United States needs to take a more all encompassing view instead of just these bilateral deals that the Trump administration seems to be sort of obsessed with. All right, number three, a fragile uncertainty permeates today's Middle East at a time when America has its most unpredictable president, right? Um, the region is fragile. And as I've talked about before, it might get worse in the fall as food prices rise because all of those states are food importers, right? And so while Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, Oman might be able to sort of weather those problems with rising import costs, some states might not. Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, right? These are going to these rising food costs and stuff like that is really going to put pressure on these regimes moving forward in the fall. And so this is a very uncertain area, and we have a very unpredictable president, which makes some of this pretty difficult. Okay, point number four. Trump's fondness for producing the image of success hinders lasting progress, right? And this is a bit of an issue here. They quote, by touting understandings or agreements that lack full clarity, Trump administration raises not only expectations, but also possibly the costs of attaining those deals, particularly in the absence of a steady, balanced diplomatic approach. And I would say here that Trump loves ambiguity, right? The Trump administration loves ambiguity. If you don't define a goal for your domestic audience, you can never fail to achieve that goal, right? And so, in a sense, this is why we're seeing 28 different sort of purported goals of the Iran war, right? And this is sort of the same with what is it called? The Board of Peace, right? Really ambiguous. We really don't know what the goals are. Um, our approach to Iran and what is victory supposed to even look like, right? Very ambiguous. And so this ambiguity in the area can cause tensions because some states don't really know how to read how this is going to play out. All right. Key point number five. Trump 2.0's use of selective military ops has damaged adversaries without achieving clear strategic outcomes, right? And again, this goes back to tactical and not strategic or political success. Yes, we blew up a bunch of like ballistic missiles capabilities. Yes, we've buried their nuclear capabilities in Iran. But we haven't really achieved anything strategic, right? Or geostrategic, anything at the high level. And so, when I got my master's degree in military science, we talk about strategic, operational, tactical, operational, and strategic goals, right? And there are three different levels of goals that we're trying to achieve, right? And you're supposed to tie each to the one above. But in some sense, we only have talked about the tactical successes of the Iran war or tactical successes in Yemen and striking the Houthis or tactical successes against ISIS in Syria and these sorts of things. But we're not solving the larger geopolitical strategy problems, right? Okay. Number six, Trump 2.0's short term transactional style of deal making risks limiting the sustainability of long term U.S. cooperative ties with the region. And, here there are some problems, right? First, we're finding that many of these bilateral deals are enriching the Trump circle, right? This includes Kushner and some of his other kids, Trump himself, some of these like Trump meme coins, etc. Um, and so this is a little bit concerning, right? Because when Trump and Kushner and Steve Witkoff walk away, what is left? Because cronyism isn't policy. And so this can be a little bit disconcerting. And some examples of this are the discussions about sort of ethnically cleansing Palestine and building luxury resorts, right? This includes recent investigations that are suggesting that Kushner went to the Iranians and said, "We'll end the war if you give us a $300 million contract to rebuild Iranian infrastructure and housing and things like that," right? That kind of stuff shouldn't be happening. We've seen at least a $2 billion payout to Kushner's quote unquote hedge fund, right? Witkoff has gotten money. Some of Trump one's former administration has gotten like billions of dollars in payouts. Money getting spent on, these meme coins and all these sorts of things. And then finally, the jet from Qatar. Trump went on an official visit to Qatar. They give him this enormous jet. And then the United States has to spend taxpayer money retrofitting it and making sure there's no surveillance equipment inside. And then apparently we're just going to scrap it after the Trump administration is over and put it in his library. This kind of stuff is odd, man. We don't see this stuff in the United States very often. And there is no long-term plan here other than, from my perspective, it looks like enriching the Trump family. But these are not sort of United States policies, right? These are core Trump administration policies. And so whether this kind of stuff is sustainable in the long run is anybody's guess, right? All right, number 7. A transactional approach to relations in the Middle East incentivizes countries to hedge in their relations with other countries, right? And they say a highly transactional approach to global economic policy from the United States has left a negative impression about America's overall reliability and produced incentives for some countries to seek support from other global competitors like China and Russia. And so we're seeing a pretty big shift in the last couple of years from UAE, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia, especially towards China and allowing more opening up towards China, more infrastructure projects for China, more military purchases from China, etc. And so, as this transactional approach and this sort of willy nilly tariff systems and all of these sorts of things keep continuing to cause uncertainty, these states are going to sort of divest themselves from the United States as much as they can and diversify their relations with other countries, which can offer some sort of economic, long term, stable policies, right? Okay. Number 8. America's unrestricted support to Israel at a time when Israel has made controversial moves limits the potential for wider openings for regional integration, stability, and peace. Um, yes, I mean, we know that Israel is maybe the touchiest subject in the region. We know that much of the region is focused against fighting back against Israel, whether it be real or whether it just be propaganda to sort of feed their citizens, to keep to quell their populations, and to blame any problems in their society on those damned Israelis, right? Who are undermining us at every turn. And so the unequivocated backing of Israel, not only under Trump 1 and 2, but also under Biden and Obama and going back 70 years, causes serious tensions in this region, right? And now we're seeing ourselves unable, it seems, to get any sort of concessions from Iran because Israel will not stop in Lebanon, right? And so we're getting repeatedly dragged back into this as Iran says, United States, if you want to make a deal, you need to get Netanyahu to settle down. And Netanyahu doesn't care. He's not interested in what Trump has to say about his own policies, right? And so at some point, you got to ask, like, when is this going to end? And when is the United States going to say, look, we're not backing Israel anymore, or maybe we're going to take a step back? That doesn't mean we're supporting these other states, but you're making the situation worse, right? Okay. Number 9, Trump's campaign against the U.S. national security institutions, along with his management style, will limit the durability of U.S. policy shifts initiated under his administration. And what we know from observation and sort of news and etc. is that the Trump administration largely disdains the bureaucracy and the institutions of the United States. Under any other president, basically throughout all of history of the United States, the Secretary of State Marco Rubio would be involved in moving all of these discussions forward. He's largely been sidelined, right? For some reason, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff have become the leads on Israel, on Palestine, Saudi Arabia, Iran, etc., right? These guys have no real international experience. They have no diplomatic experience. And in some sense, there's a question about, that there have been many questions from reporters about, okay, why are Witkoff and Kushner why are they our high level diplomats and why are they getting these payouts from these states? And the Trump administration is basically saying, well, that's not illegal because they're volunteers. They're not employees of the federal government. But man, that's a shady argument. And so this disdain for the institutions, and even in a sense like tearing down the institutions, like the Secretary of State's office, like USAID, etc., means that we're not going to be able to carry out these plans long term, and that might actually be the point in some sense. Okay, the final key point, the lack of lasting coalitions at home and in the region to support Trump's current policies will likely give them a short shelf life, right? Most of these policies are not popular. The Iran war is not popular. Our ties with Saudi Arabia are not very popular if you look at public opinion polls. And so Trump not only doesn't really have a lot of sort of backing from the Middle East outside of maybe, I don't know, Saudi Arabia, they also don't really have much backing from his domestic audience, which means that like this stuff probably isn't going to last if and when a new administration comes in. Okay, section 3, Trump 2.0's overall foreign policy in his first year. So, they lay out 7 major policy shifts that we have taken since Trump 1 took office January 20 of last year. Number 1, the Don Roe Doctrine and prioritizing the Western Hemisphere over other areas in the world. This inevitably means a reduction in attention to the Middle East. Number 2, new economic nationalism, right? And this includes tariffs as bargaining leverage, which actually has reduced our trade deficit, but it has weakened our exports. It has led to inflation. It has led to lower productivity in the United States, and it has led to higher input costs. All of these are bad things, right? And so, yes, if we're just talking about trade balance, then an argument can be made that it has become better, right? Because that trade imbalance has shrunk. But in a sense, imports are good for Americans. We're getting cheap products for far less than we can make them in the United States. We are trading off all of the pollutants and the runoff and all of this that is caused from manufacturing and production, etc. And so there are benefits to running a trade deficit. There are benefits to having comparative advantage under Ricardian theory, all of these things. So just because you reduce the trade deficit doesn't necessarily mean that this is all good, right? Okay, the third shift from Trump 2.0 is pursuing what they call quick win diplomatic deals, right? And I would say um, you can look at Yemen. We got a couple real quick deals and then it sort of devolved. You can look at Saudi Arabia, where we've basically gotten them to promise investment and purchase our foreign military equipment. And then you could look at a place like Palestine, right, where yes, we got a ceasefire in place, but then we really haven't done anything since, right? We never really put in the peacekeeping mission. We never really disarmed Hamas. We never told Israel to back off back to their old lines, all of these sorts of things. And so there seems to be this like inattentiveness or almost, I don't know, ADHD style of foreign policy where we're in there, we get something done quick and we move along, but it's not maybe lasting, right? Okay. The fourth shift from Trump 1 is deprioritizing international and multilateral institutions and advancing highly transactional selective bilateralism. And so we have shifted drastically from international and multilateral institutions to try and have dialogue, etc., to these bilateral agreements on trade, foreign policy, military purchases, etc. Uh, I would make a couple of arguments here, a couple of concerning arguments. First is bilateral agreements allow for more corruption and graft, whereas multilateral and international organizations sort of keep an eye on those because there's more players participating. And then, second, I would suggest that just exiting international institutions does not necessarily weaken those institutions. It creates a power vacuum, and the vacuum will be filled. And it is generally being filled by China and India, from what we are seeing. And so, just exiting institutions can actually be an incredibly costly act because those institutions are continuing to set rules and policies and all of these sorts of things. And we're going to have to maybe fight and scrap our way back into them or just be sort of sidelined. And both of those are a little bit disconcerting. Okay, shift number 5, cutting traditional tools of US national security. So we've seen massive cuts in USAID, right? International aid. We've seen massive cuts in healthcare aid internationally. We've seen massive cuts in our diplomatic staff and our diplomatic institutions. And Rubio in the Secretary of State's office has been largely sidelined, which I've never really seen in my lifetime before. Okay, number 6, downgrading democracy and human rights in foreign policy. We know that the Secretary of State's office and some other American institutions have removed a whole bunch of verbiage, as has the CIA, on human rights observations in foreign countries, violence against women, violence against children, human trafficking, all of these things. We are no longer reporting them. I don't quite understand why. But all of that stuff has been pulled out of our CIA fact books and all the rest of it. And so, in a sense, it's just allowing more shadows to exist for these human rights violations, torture, political imprisonment, um, trafficking of women and children, etc., because no one's reporting it. Okay. Finally, number 7, pursuing an incoherent approach on China. I don't really think we know what we're doing with China. In some sense, we are actually strengthening them because we're pushing, I wouldn't even say partners or allies, but we're pushing these states in the region closer to China as they try and sort of build a wall against American confusion. I don't know. And so, in a sense, we've even lost this game with China. We tried to put up huge tariff barriers. Uh, Xi Jinping flipped out and said, all right, well, then you're not getting our critical minerals anymore. And then Trump had to back off. I mean, in a sense, China has sort of won this game in the long run. Okay. Yeah, I think that's going to cover it. I'm going to leave it there. There's really no reason for me to cover the rest. And then I will jump into the soft power of China next. And then I'm going to put out a couple of supplemental lectures at the end about Iran and maybe one thing about just my views on the region moving forward. All right. Thanks so much for being here. Have a great day. Thanks for all your hard work.